Have you ever had that eerie feeling when something seems completely normal, but somehow feels wrong? That's exactly what happened to me on a quiet drive home one night, and I still can't shake the feeling that I escaped something truly sinister. I had just gotten off work at 11 p.m., tired but relieved to head home. My house was about a 45-minute drive outside the city, and these drives back were usually my favorite part of the day. Peaceful, quiet, and the perfect way to unwind. The roads were always empty at this hour, especially as I got closer to home, where dense forests and foggy stretches made it feel like I was driving through a ghost story. That night was no different, until it was. I was about 20 minutes from home, turning down the familiar side road that led directly to my house. The road was as eerie as ever, dimly lit, surrounded by shadowy trees, and blanketed with fog so thick I could only see a few feet ahead. But I wasn't worried. After all, I'd driven this road 1,000 times, and nothing bad had ever happened. That's when I noticed it, a small blinking light in the fog, faint and hard to pinpoint. I slowed down, squinting to see what it was, but before I could figure it out, the light went out completely. I was still trying to process what I'd seen when, out of nowhere, a car pulled out of the fog and stopped dead in front of me. I slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. My car tapped the back of theirs with a dull thud. I sat there, frozen, my heart pounding. The accident wasn't serious, barely a scratch, but something about it felt off. The car in front of me was old and beat up, its headlights turned off, blending into the fog. As I opened my door and stepped out, I could see someone moving in the driver's seat, but they weren't getting out. When the man finally stepped out, he moved slowly toward me. He was big, middle-aged, with a strange, shifty demeanor. He wouldn't make eye contact, and the way he kept glancing around sent chills down my spine. "Is everything okay?" I asked, trying to sound calm. "Yeah, sorry," he muttered, barely looking at me. Something was wrong. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. I told him there was no real damage and I'd just be heading home. But as I turned to get back in my car, he stopped me. "Wait," he said, almost urgently. "I need to check for damage." He started walking around his car, inspecting it like he was looking for something. But I'd barely tapped his bumper. It didn't make sense. Then I saw it, the shadowy outline of a large figure sitting up in the back seat. My blood ran cold. What would you do in this situation? Stay calm and see what happens, or trust your instincts and get out of there? Let me know your answer in the comments. I'm curious to see how you'd handle it. Without thinking, I jumped back into my car and locked the doors. As I fumbled to put the car in drive, the back door of the other vehicle swung open. A second man stepped out, both of them now waving their arms and yelling for me to stop. I didn't wait to find out what they wanted. My instincts screamed at me to go. I swerved around their car and sped down the road, my heart racing as I watched their headlights appear in my rearview mirror. They followed me for about 30 seconds, but then they stopped. Their lights disappeared into the fog, leaving me alone on the road. I didn't go straight home. Instead, I pulled into a gas station about 5 minutes away and waited, my hands shaking on the wheel. I sat there for 15 minutes, watching every car that passed. They never came. When I finally drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd narrowly escaped something terrible. Looking back, I can't help but wonder, what were they planning? Was it just an accident? Or was it something more sinister? Part of me wishes I'd called the cops, but another part is just grateful I trusted my instincts and got out. So what do you think? Did I escape a trap? Or was I just overreacting? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And remember, sometimes trusting your instincts can mean the difference between safety and something far worse. Stay safe out there. Imagine being alone on a desolate highway at 1 a.m., miles away from civilization. The road is silent, the night dark. And then you notice something, a shadow moving behind you, following your every turn. What would you do? Welcome to Midnight Whispers. Tonight's story will make you question the safety of the open road. This is the unnerving tale of a trucker's late-night delivery gone horribly wrong. I used to work for a small trucking company delivering frozen goods to stores across several states. Most nights I'd finish my route and head home. But occasionally, the job required an overnight stay. On those nights, I'd pull into a truck stop, catch a few hours of sleep, and continue my journey. That night, I had a long delivery. I unloaded the truck and started heading back home. It was 1 a.m., and exhaustion was setting in. The last sign I saw said there was a truck stop 40 miles ahead. I figured I'd stop there to rest. The road was long and lonely, the kind where you almost feel like you're the last person on Earth. But then, out of nowhere, headlights appeared in my side mirror, bright and far too close to my trailer. At first, I thought it was just another driver waiting to pass. But they didn't. They stayed right behind me, their headlights glaring in my mirror. My nerves started to creep in. Why weren't they passing? The truck stop was just a few miles away, so I focused on getting there. But the car didn't back off. It followed me into the parking lot. I pulled into a parking spot, shifted into park, and watched as the car stopped just feet behind me. I couldn't see much, only that it was a beat-up white sedan, rusted all over. As soon as I stepped out of the truck, the car reversed and the driver sped off. I caught a glimpse of him, an older man, his face eerily blank. Something about the way he left didn't feel right. I shrugged it off, checked my trailer locks, and climbed back into the cab. I made sure all the doors were locked, took one last look out the window, and laid back to rest. Now, here's a question for you. What would you do if you were in this situation? Would you confront the stranger or stay inside the truck? Let me know your answer in the comments below. I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I heard was a loud bang. It echoed through my trailer, snapping me awake. I checked my watch. It was a little past 3 a.m., then another bang, louder this time. I froze, listening, when I noticed movement in my side mirror. A faint shadow flickered near the back of my truck. Grabbing the knife I kept in my glove compartment, I slid out of the truck quietly, leaving the driver's door ajar so I wouldn't make a sound. As I crept toward the back of the trailer, I crouched low and looked under it. There I saw him, a man standing right against the back door of my truck. His car was parked behind mine, headlights off. My heart raced. I could see him fiddling with the lock on the trailer door. I shouted, my voice shaky but loud enough to startle him. He froze, then bolted to his car and sped off into the night. When I checked the back door, my stomach dropped. The lock was covered in scratches, deep gouges, as if he'd been trying to cut it open. I stood there, scanning the empty parking lot. Not a soul in sight. It was just me, the truck, and the dark. I didn't feel safe anymore, so I climbed back into the truck, locked every door again, and hit the road. My trailer was empty. There was nothing for him to steal. But the thought that he might have been waiting for me to fall asleep again made my skin crawl. The rest of the drive was uneventful. But even now, years later, I can't shake the paranoia. Every time I see headlights in my mirror, I wonder if someone's following me, waiting for the right moment. So, what do you think his intentions were? Was he just a desperate thief? Or was there something more sinister at play? Share your theories in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to Midnight Whispers for more terrifying tales. Until next time, sleep tight and always check your mirrors. You ever take a wrong turn and instantly regret it? That's exactly what happened to me and my friends last year when we went to a concert in the south side of Chicago. Now, If you know anything about that area, you know it has a reputation, high crime rates, sketchy streets. But the tickets were cheap, the concert was packed, and we figured as long as we stuck together, we'd be fine. The show was incredible, the kind of night you don't forget. But what happened after? That's something I wish I could forget. It was almost 10 p.m. when we left, and as expected, the traffic was a nightmare. Cars were barely moving. We sat there for what felt like forever, creeping forward inch by inch. That's when my friend in the passenger seat started looking up alternate routes. "Hey, there's a side road that should cut past all of this," he said, sitting in the same spot for 30 minutes. Yeah, no thanks. We all agreed to take the shortcut. Big mistake. As soon as we turned off the main road, something felt off. The streets were dark, barely any streetlights, and yet there were people outside, a lot of people, just standing there, watching. We passed by slowly, trying not to make eye contact. But the further we went, the weirder it got. No other cars, no noise except our own engine. And those people, they weren't just outside randomly. It felt like they were waiting for something. My friend pulled out his phone, zooming out on the map. Guys, where's the nearest main road?" Before he could find it, we saw the car, parked sideways, blocking the entire street. I slammed the brakes. The car was just sitting there, no lights on, no movement. Something told me we should not go near it. Without a second thought, I put the car in reverse, backing out as fast as I could. We turned back onto the last street, relieved, until we saw it again. Another car, parked sideways, blocking both lanes. My stomach dropped. This wasn't random. This was a setup. We sat there, frozen, trying to figure out what to do. That's when two men stepped out from the shadows. One stood behind the car. The other walked straight toward my window. He motioned for me to roll it down. Now here's my question for you. What would you do in this situation? Would you roll down the window, try to reason with him? Or would you floor it and risk getting trapped? Tell me in the comments. Because what I did next, I'm not sure if it was the right move. Nervously, I cracked the window just a couple inches. The man leaned in, scanning our car. Then he asked almost casually, "Where you headed?" "Just back to the highway," I muttered. He nodded, glancing at his friend. And then everything went still. No one moved. No one spoke. The air felt heavy. And then at the exact same time, both men grabbed our doors and started yanking them violently. We screamed. I threw the car into reverse as hard as I could. One of them shoved his arm through the crack in my window, clawing at the door lock, his nails scraping against the glass. I hit the gas, hard. His arm got stuck for a second before he slammed to the ground. We sped back the way we came, this time not stopping for anything. Somehow, we made it back to the highway, hearts pounding, hands shaking. No one spoke for a long time. We'd almost been part of something very, very bad. And the scariest part, if we had waited even 1 second longer, I don't think I'd be here to tell you this story. So next time you're stuck in traffic, maybe just stay put. And if you ever see a car blocking your way, turn around, fast.star. You ever hear a scream so chilling, so unnatural, that it makes your blood turn ice cold? I did, and I still don't know if I should have run toward it or away from it. It was a regular night, or at least I thought it was. I was driving home from work, taking my usual route. Midnight shift, small town, barely any traffic, just miles of dark roads, cornfields on one side, thick woods on the other. It was the middle of summer, warm, quiet, peaceful. My convertible top was down, the night air rushing past me as I cruised at 50 miles per hour. Then it happened. A blood-curdling scream, a woman's scream. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding. The scream had come from the woods, but which side? It was impossible to tell. Then I heard it again, this time clearly from the left. somewhere deep in the trees. A woman's voice, crying, begging, "Help me. Please, someone help me." I grabbed the baton from my back seat. I don't know why, but I felt like I'd need it. "Who's out there?" I yelled. "Please help me," she cried again, sounding even more desperate. I didn't think. I just ran. Branches scratched my arms. Leaves crunched under my boots. I followed her voice, blindly pushing forward. "Keep screaming," I shouted, "so I can find you." And she did. Every 10 seconds. "Help!" I ran faster. "Help!" Faster. But something wasn't right. No matter how far I went, she didn't sound any closer. In fact, she sounded exactly the same distance away. I stopped. My breath was ragged, my skin crawling. I yelled again. "Tell me where you are." Silence then, 5 seconds later. "Help!" The exact same pitch, the exact same tone. And that's when I realized I wasn't getting closer to her. She was leading me deeper in. "Stop, think for a second. What would you have done in this situation? Would you have kept going, or would you have turned back? Drop your answer in the comments." Because I turned back. And I swear, she followed me. As I ran toward my car, the screams continued. Still the same distance. I burst out of the woods, my headlights flashing in the distance. I didn't stop until I was back in my car, slamming the door shut, peeling out of there like my life depended on it. But the worst part, the screams never faded. They stayed behind me, in the woods, watching, waiting. I called 911, told them someone might be in trouble. But I wasn't sticking around. I tried to shake it off, tell myself it was just a trick of the mind. But then, 1 week later, a news report. A woman's body found in those same woods. No signs of foul play. She'd been dead for over a week, the same time I heard the screams. I don't know what I ran into that night. I don't know who or what was calling for help, but I do know one thing. If I had kept running forward that night, instead of turning back, I don't think I would have ever come back out. I was driving from Brooklyn to Vermont, heading to my friend John's cabin for a weekend of snowboarding. It was supposed to be a relaxing trip. Just me, the open road, and the fresh powder waiting for me on the slopes. I had 2 cars at the time. A sleek 2013 BMW 3 Series and my old unreliable 2006 Ford F-150. Since I needed to haul my snowboarding gear, I took the truck. A decision I would regret. It was 1 a.m., and I was deep in the wilderness. The roads were empty, the trees stood like frozen sentinels, and the only sound was the crunch of snow beneath my tires. There were no streetlights, just miles of darkness. I felt like I was the only person left on Earth. Then, as if the universe decided to mess with me, my truck started overheating. The temperature gauge shot up into the red, and steam hissed from under the hood. I had no choice but to pull over. I waited, let the engine cool down, and tried again. The second I got back on the road, the needle spiked back up. I was stranded. To make matters worse, my phone had 0 signal. Thanks, T-Mobile. No way to call John, no way to call for help. Just me, my dying truck, and the black abyss of the snowy forest around me. Then a pair of headlights appeared in the distance. I turned on my hazards and waved my arms, desperate for help. A small Toyota pulled over. The driver, a man in his late 40s, rolled down his window. "You all right?" he asked. I quickly explained my situation and asked if I could borrow his phone. He stared at me for a moment before asking, "Are you alone?" Something about the way he said it sent a chill down my spine. But I nodded. He handed me his phone. I called John, who told me to contact a local towing company. I did, gave them my location, and told John to meet me at the body shop. When I handed the guy his phone back, he simply nodded, no words, then rolled up his window and drove off, disappearing into the darkness ahead. I was alone again, sitting in my truck, I flicked off the headlights for a moment just to see how dark it was. Big mistake. The second my lights went out, I realized just how deep the darkness really was. I couldn't see an inch outside my windows. It was like being swallowed whole. So I turned them back on and waited, and that's when I heard it, the loud, sharp bang on my passenger window. If you were in this situation, completely alone, stranded on an empty road, and someone banged on your window in the middle of the night, what would you do? Would you roll down the window, drive off, or do something else? Let me know in the comments. I jumped so hard I nearly hit my head on the roof. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned to the window. Someone was standing there, a tall figure wrapped in a heavy black coat, hood pulled over their head. Their face was mostly hidden in the shadows, but I could see their breath fogging up the glass. He started banging harder. "Please, let me in! I'm freezing, please!" he shouted. His voice was desperate, shaking with panic. He grabbed the door handle and yanked. It was locked. "What's wrong?" I shouted back, gripping my steering wheel. "I'm lost. I don't know where I am. Please, I need to get out of the cold." Something felt off. His voice was frantic, but not in a normal way, more like someone playing a role. Forced, staged. My gut was screaming at me. "Do not open the door." Before I could say another word, he slammed his fists against the window even harder. The entire truck shook. Then he grabbed something from his pocket. I didn't stick around to see what it was. I threw the truck into drive and floored it. The engine screamed in protest, but I didn't care. I just needed to get the hell out of there. And then I saw something that made my blood run cold. As I crested a small hill, I noticed the pair of taillights parked on the side of the road ahead. The same Toyota. I slowed down and rolled down my window just enough to look inside as I passed. The driver's seat was empty. Then my headlights caught something. Footprints in the snow, leading from the car straight to where I had been parked. It was him. The man at my window was the same guy who helped me earlier. I felt like I was going to be sick. At this point, I didn't care if my truck's engine melted into a puddle of metal. I kept driving until I saw another pair of headlights in the distance. It was the tow truck. I nearly cheered when I saw it. I pulled over and jumped out, breathless, shaking. The driver stepped out and asked what was wrong. When I told him, he frowned and said, "That guy had a gun?" I don't know. I couldn't see," I admitted. "Well," he said, looking around, "let's do this fast." The Toyota never passed us. Whoever that man was, he either turned around or was still out there, watching. The tow truck took me to the body shop, where John picked me up. We still went snowboarding that weekend. A few weeks later, I sold the truck. But sometimes, late at night, I think about it. What if I had opened that door? What if I had let him in? And worst of all, what if he wasn't alone? You know that feeling when you're being watched? That eerie sensation crawling up your spine? I felt it that night, but I didn't realize how close it really was. This story still haunts me, even years later. I was 17 when I had my first girlfriend. Life was simple: school, work, and spending as much time as possible with her. My parents had divorced when I was 11, so I lived with my mom. One Friday night, after work, I picked up my girlfriend for a simple date. Nothing fancy, just a small restaurant 10 minutes from my house. That's all I could afford at the time. After dinner, she wasn't ready for the night to end. "That's it?" she complained. "Can't we do something else?" I didn't have money for a movie or anything extravagant, so we settled on a night drive. Bad idea. At first, we stayed in town, driving past dimly lit streets and empty parking lots. But then we took a detour, a long, winding road that led into the woods. The farther we drove, the quieter it got. The hum of the car engine and the occasional chirping of crickets were the only sounds. Eventually, the pavement ended. We were on a dirt road now, surrounded by tall trees that swallowed the moonlight. That's when I realized I really had to pee. Turns out she did too. So I pulled over. We stepped out of the car, and immediately our night took a terrifying turn. A horrible smell hit us, thick, rotten, and completely unnatural. My girlfriend gagged. It was the kind of smell that made your stomach churn, but I brushed it off. Probably just a dead animal. I muttered, "Let's hurry up." We walked a few feet away from the car, found a flat spot, and did our business. That's when we heard it. Snap a twig breaking. We both froze. Now let me ask you this. If you were in this situation, what would you do? Would you investigate, run to the car, or try to stay quiet and hide? Drop your answer in the comments. Trust me, what happens next is worse than you think. We rushed back toward the car, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. But just as I reached for the door handle, a scream, loud, close, and filled with pain. The same place where we had just been. My girlfriend grabbed my arm. "Get in the car," she pleaded, but something inside me, a mix of stupidity and false bravery, made me want to check it out. I locked the car doors, telling her to stay put. Slowly, I crept toward the spot where we heard the scream. Every step felt heavier, like the air itself was warning me not to go any further. And then I heard it again. Another scream, closer. I pulled out my phone, turned on the flash, and took a picture. The moment the flash went off, I saw him, a man, standing completely still, just a few feet away. He wore a white shirt with black stripes, and in front of him, a blue tarp. My stomach dropped. I didn't stay to find out what was under that tarp. I turned and sprinted back to the car, fumbling with the lock. The second I got in, I floored it. My girlfriend kept asking, "What did you see? What did you see?" But I couldn't speak, not yet. We didn't stop driving until we were back in town, beneath the glow of street lights. Only then did I tell her. I showed her the picture on my phone. There he was, the man in the woods, standing motionless, staring at the camera. The blue tarp in front of him. She went pale. That night, I stayed at her house. Neither of us wanted to be alone. We never found out what was under that tarp. A body. Something worse, I don't know. But the way he stood there, waiting, watching. It felt like we had interrupted something, or maybe he was waiting for us to get closer. What do you think was under that tarp? And do you think I should have investigated? Or do you think I barely escaped something terrible? Drop your theories in the comments. I'm curious and a little scared to know what you think. This was, without a doubt, the scariest night of my life. Even though my girlfriend and I broke up years later, we still talk about that night. Some things you just never forget. It was late summer 2011, and I was almost 19, hanging out with my best friend, who was a few years younger than me. We lived in a rural area of southwestern Virginia, about 15 minutes from Mount Airy, North Carolina. Around here, everything shuts down by 10 p.m., so finding ways to pass the time can be a challenge. But that was never an issue for us. We always found something to do. The night started off as usual. First we hit the mall, then cruised the streets looking for girls, like any typical teenage guys. When that failed, we went bowling until they closed. Around midnight, we ended up walking the back alleys of Main Street, trying to act edgy, like we owned the place. But honestly, we never felt in danger. There's just not much crime in the area, and we were used to these kinds of late-night adventures. Once we got bored of walking the streets, we grabbed a bite at Waffle House, our only late-night option at the time, then made a quick stop at Walmart. We still weren't ready to call it a night, so we decided to take a drive through the backcountry roads. These roads were our thing, quiet, dark, and empty. We knew them like the back of our hands, but tonight, something felt off. The stretch of road we were now on, I had only driven maybe once before during the day. It wasn't far from where we lived, but we never had any reason to go down it. The paved road turned into dirt after a mile, the kind of road that's rarely maintained because no one really lives out here. With the rain and rough terrain, you had to drive slowly. So, we were cruising at a crawl, unsure of what to expect on a road this unfamiliar. As we drove, the air felt thicker, and a weird tension started building. It was just the two of us out there, and the silence of the woods was suffocating. But as we were nearing a bend, something caught the corner of my eye. Out of nowhere, I saw a light, a porch light. It wasn't too far off the road. At first, I thought nothing of it. But then I saw him, a man, standing perfectly still under that light. He wasn't moving. His eyes didn't seem to blink. He was just staring at us. It felt like time had stopped. We both noticed him at the same time. His head followed us, tracking our movements, but his body remained motionless. I tried not to make a big deal of it, thinking maybe he was just out for a late-night cigarette. But that stillness, it was wrong. After a few long, uncomfortable moments, we decided to keep going. But the unease lingered. We were quiet, both of us trying to ignore the lingering feeling that something wasn't right. Just a few minutes later, we came to the end of the road. We turned onto a more familiar stretch, and the tension started to ease as we picked up speed. But then, about 10 minutes later, we saw something up ahead. The glow of the headlights revealed a figure moving slowly in the distance. At first, we thought it was a deer. We'd seen a lot of them around here, and they often wandered into the road. But as we got closer, we realized it wasn't a deer at all. It was a woman, hunched over, walking at an unnatural pace, with her back to us. She was dressed in a white t-shirt and pants, but as we got closer, she turned, her face pale, gaunt, eyes sunken deep into her skull. Wasn't something I'll ever forget. My friend, with a shaky voice, whispered, "What the hell is she doing walking at this time of night?" Then she raised her arms, waving them frantically, and ran toward us, screaming. That's when we saw the blood on her shirt, the streaks of red staining her clothes. And in her hand, she held a large knife. We didn't need to say anything. Both of us instinctively floored it, not looking back until we reached the highway. We were so terrified that a 5-minute drive back to my house turned into a 35-minute detour. We didn't talk much, but the fear between us was palpable. We both kept wondering, who was she? What was she doing there? We never saw her again, and no news reports came through about a woman being found on the backcountry roads. But then, just last year, something strange happened. I now live with my wife on that same peaceful road. It's a beautiful, quiet place, but every time I drive through, I feel something's still watching me. No sign of that woman, but that man standing under the porch light. He was never identified either. Here's the question that still haunts me. Could that woman have been a victim of something darker? Someone or something watching her? Or was she something else entirely? What do you think she was? Was it a random encounter? Or is there something more sinister at play? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's solve this mystery together. I once had 2 job interviews in North Carolina, and at the time, I was living in New York. Instead of flying down, I decided to drive to save money. My job in New York was terrible, and these interviews were my shot at a fresh start. A corporate office job with great benefits, a decent salary, and most importantly, better weather than New York. I set off on Thursday night. My plan was to drive through the night, get to North Carolina early Friday morning, and be ready for the interviews that afternoon. I didn't want to waste any time. My ETA? 2 a.m. I'd had about 3 cups of coffee to keep me awake. But by the time I was about 2 hours from my destination, I was starting to feel the exhaustion hit. The late-night highway was practically empty, and I was alone with my thoughts. That's when I saw him. Standing on the side of the highway, there was a man in a suit, not moving, not walking, just standing there, facing my car as I drove by. I couldn't help but stare. And then he turned his head, following my car as I passed. I muttered, "What the hell is going on?" and tried to shake it off. It was 12:30 a.m. Maybe I was just tired. I made up stories in my head, trying to keep myself awake. Maybe the guy had just gotten dumped by his girlfriend and was walking down the road. Who knows? But then, just 10 minutes later, I saw another man, also in a suit, standing there staring at me from the side of the road. I slowed down. My curiosity piqued, but as soon as I looked into the rearview mirror, I turned back around, and he was gone. Like he disappeared into thin air. I froze for a second, my heart racing, but I didn't stop. I needed coffee. I pulled into the first gas station I could find and grabbed another cup. I drank it quickly, but as I sat in the rest area, something caught my eye. Under a street lamp, there he was again. The same man, staring directly at my car. His face was clearer now. A middle-aged white man, clean-shaven, short brown hair. He looked almost normal, but it was the way he was standing. It felt wrong. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. I didn't even look back. At this point, I was wide awake, but so exhausted that I knew I couldn't keep driving. I pulled off the highway and parked in a random lot. My car seat reclined. I closed my eyes, hoping for just a few minutes of sleep, but my mind wouldn't let me rest. Suddenly, I snapped awake. My heart pounded. Something was wrong. I looked around. The parking lot was empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I peered into the rearview mirror, and that's when I saw it. A figure, the same man, standing right behind me in the back seat. His face was emotionless. My stomach dropped. My body went cold. I jumped out of the car, screaming, scrambling backwards as I tripped and fell. When I finally got to my feet and looked inside, the back seat was empty. Nothing but darkness. I stood there, shaking, trying to make sense of it all. Maybe I was just hallucinating from lack of sleep. I was exhausted, after all. But it didn't explain how he kept showing up. I finished my coffee, trying to stay awake, and finally made the rest of the drive. By the time I checked into the hotel and collapsed into bed, it felt like I hadn't slept in days. The next day, I had my first interview at 11 a.m. I was still exhausted, but I felt like I was somewhat recharged. That was until my interviewer walked in. The second he walked in, I froze. The man, the one I had seen on the highway and in the parking lot, he looked identical. Same face, same suit. My heart skipped a beat. I could tell my interviewer noticed the look of shock on my face. I tried to recover, but the damage was done. The interview was a disaster. Afterward, I only had an hour before the next interview. This time, I did better. It was with a woman, and I managed to calm myself down. By the end of the day, I had the job. But the image of that man in the suite never left me. My therapist later explained that the stress, combined with exhaustion, might have caused me to hallucinate, a figure I feared. But to this day, I can't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Now I have to ask you, do you think it was just stress and exhaustion? Or was there something more sinister going on that night? Let me know what you think in the comments below. I got the job, yes, but something happened shortly after I started that made me question everything. But that's a story for another time. It was just after midnight in Clearfield County, Pennsylvania. I was driving home, trying to avoid the usual traffic, and the road was empty, just the way I liked it. The dim lights of my car illuminated the dark, secluded stretch of road as I zoned out to my favorite podcast. The calm was interrupted by a sudden ding. My dashboard flashed a low fuel warning. I tapped my Maps app for the nearest gas station. About 5 minutes down the road, there was a small no-name gas station in the middle of nowhere. It was the kind of place where the only sign of life was the flickering light above the pump. I pulled in and parked next to the only other vehicle, a rundown pickup truck. The man filling up the truck glanced over as I walked past him and into the store. He looked odd, like he didn't belong here. I brushed it off, paid for my coffee and gas, and headed back outside. When I got to my car, I saw the man drive off. A few minutes later, I was back on the road, but something felt off. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the same pickup truck, sitting by the side of the road, just off the grass, with no headlights on. I tried to shake it off, but as I drove, the feeling of being watched lingered. It was just too strange. Then out of nowhere, ding. My dashboard lit up again. This time, my tire was low. I could hear a wobbling noise, so I pulled over. Sure enough, I had a flat tire. But something didn't sit right. What if that man at the gas station had slashed it? My stomach twisted at the thought. I pulled out my phone to call roadside assistance, but before I could press the number, I heard it, the low rumble of an engine behind me. But no headlights, just darkness. Then the engine cut out. It was so quiet I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. I grabbed my flashlight from the trunk, trying to calm myself down. As I shone the beam down the road, the reflection of headlights appeared out of nowhere, about 200 feet away. It was the same pickup truck. Why was it back? Here's the first question I want to ask you. Why do you think this man came back? Was he really just coincidentally there? Or was there something darker at play? Drop your theories in the comments below. I'd love to know what you think. I panicked. I ducked behind a tree, my heart racing, as I called 911. I heard the truck pull up next to my car. My eyes were glued to the headlights as I whispered my location into the phone. The operator asked me a few questions about the man and his truck. As I heard the truck door slam, I held my breath. The operator told me to stay hidden. I prayed my connection would hold, but the call dropped, no bars. I was completely alone out here. Then I heard it, another car, slowing down. I crept closer to the edge of the woods, careful not to make a sound. I could see the man from the truck standing in the middle of the road, talking to another guy. I overheard him making up a story about why I was out here in the middle of nowhere. That's when I couldn't take it anymore. I bolted into the road, screaming for help. "I don't know him." The two men turned. The stranger in the truck looked at the creepy man, his face twisted in disbelief. The man who followed me denied everything, insisting he'd never seen me before. Without saying another word, he backed up his truck and drove off. Just like that. The man in the other truck examined my tire and offered to give me a ride into town. But I didn't need a ride anymore. I had the police on the way. Minutes later, the sound of sirens echoed in the distance. The officer arrived and the man vouched for me. He confirmed my story. The officer said he'd checked the gas station's cameras for footage of the man slashing my tire. He took my information and stayed with me while I waited for roadside assistance. The tow truck driver gave me a lift to a local garage where my dad picked me up. But the most chilling part? The officer never called me back. I never heard anything about the footage, but what if that footage revealed something even darker? Something they didn't want to confront? I still can't shake the feeling that I was this close to something much worse. What do you think? Was that man stalking me all along? Or was I just in the wrong place at the wrong time? Let me know what you think in the comments. Stay safe out there, and remember, sometimes the quietest roads hide the darkest secrets. It was the most horrific night of my life, a night that still haunts me. I can feel the shivers down my spine just thinking about it. I'm 28 years old, and my boyfriend Todd lives in a different state. We take turns visiting each other, but I usually end up going to him more because he has his own place, while I still live with my sister. It was winter break, and as a teacher, I had the week off. I packed up my things and decided to drive up to Todd's place in my crappy 2009 Hyundai Sonata, which I'd inherited from my sister. The snow was already starting to fall, and the further north I drove, the more treacherous the roads became. My car was definitely not built for snow, and soon the blizzard warnings that had been predicted started to show their true colors. By the time I accepted the fact that I couldn't make it any further tonight, the snow had already started piling up. I had to find somewhere to stay for the night. I stopped at a small diner for some coffee and a sandwich, hoping to regroup. The waitress, after overhearing my conversation, told me it was unsafe to be on the road and suggested a few motels in the area. As I sat there, a man sitting at the bar suddenly spun around in his chair. "There's a motel right up the road," he said, almost as if he knew exactly what I needed. It was a little odd, but when I checked on my phone, it was just 5 minutes away. He seemed to know everything about the weather, the diner, even my situation. The man, who introduced himself as Toby, mentioned it was cheap and that I'd get a good night's rest before continuing my journey. I didn't think much of it at first. He was just a guy at a bar, drinking beer in a diner. Odd, but whatever. I wasn't in the mood for small talk, so I gave him a fake name, Michelle, and kept my distance. The diner cleared out, and I paid my bill, feeling uneasy but too tired to really care. When I got to the motel, it was exactly as expected. Cheap, with only a few cars in the parking lot. I got a room for around $50, and the man behind the desk handed me a key to a downstairs room. I rushed to my room, not wanting to waste any time. It was a tiny room with tacky wallpaper, a queen-sized bed, and red carpet. It wasn't ideal, but it was all I needed for the night. I tried FaceTiming Todd, but there was no reception. The motel had Wi-Fi, but it was spotty at best. I went back to the front desk to get the password, and as I walked outside into the cold, I noticed a new car in the lot. Someone was sitting inside, but I didn't think much of it. People in this part of the world were different. When I returned to my room and finally managed to get online, I texted Todd. We exchanged messages, trying to make the best of the situation. That's when I heard it. A sound from the bathroom. I froze. Was the door shut before? I couldn't remember. I texted Todd immediately, telling him I heard something and that I was freaking out. He asked if the door locked on its own. I wasn't sure. It wasn't a deadbolt, just a regular twist lock, but now I couldn't remember if I'd left it slightly cracked. I decided to check. As I opened the door, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Footprints leading to my door, but no one was in that car anymore. Those footprints weren't from me. I rushed back to the front desk, barely keeping my composure as I told the man there was someone in my room. His response was chillingly calm. Instead of calling the police, he spoke to someone in a foreign language, maybe a friend. After what felt like an eternity, he hung up and told me to wait there. Then something happened that I will never forget. I saw it through the glass. Toby. He was walking toward my room, then back to his car. We locked eyes for a brief moment before he disappeared down the snow-covered road, leaving me terrified and confused. So here's the question that haunts me even now. Was Toby in on something? Was he involved in whatever happened to me that night? Or was he just some bizarre coincidence? What do you think? I want to know your thoughts in the comments. Was Toby just a strange man? Or was he the key to something far darker? The man at the desk offered me a different room. I had no choice but to accept. I was too scared to stay there, but I had nowhere else to go. I moved my things, trembling, and tried to sleep, but the feeling of being watched never left. The next morning, the roads were somewhat plowed, and I made the rest of the drive to Todd's, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been off at that motel. I called the diner to warn them about Toby, but they didn't seem to care. Looking back, I can't help but wonder, was I the only one who ever felt something was wrong? Maybe I'll never know, but I've learned one thing for sure. Trusting strangers, especially in places like that, is a mistake I'll never make again. Was Toby just a weird coincidence, or is there something darker lurking behind his appearance? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think he had something to do with what happened to me that night? It was December of 2015, and I was in the middle of a cross-country drive from the north to the south, heading back home for the semester break. A university student in my early 20s, I was making my way through the desolate, quiet roads of Kentucky on I-65 South, late at night. The clock read 11:30 p.m., and I still had about an hour to go before I reached the city where I'd stop for the night. The highway was eerily empty, with no other cars in sight for what felt like miles. I was driving through a 6-lane stretch, 3 lanes in each direction, just south of Mammoth Cave National Park, not far from Bowling Green. Everything was calm until I started fiddling with my phone to change the music. That's when I noticed it. In my rearview mirror, I saw the headlights of an 18-wheeler slowly coming up behind me. I thought nothing of it at first. I clicked off my phone and decided to just wait for the truck to pass, but it didn't. Instead of speeding past, it matched my pace. I was confused, a little creeped out, and for some reason I felt a knot form in my stomach. As the truck kept pace, something else caught my eye. A spotlight on the side of the truck clicked on, blinding me with a harsh beam of light that shone directly into my car. I couldn't help but stare straight ahead, trying to keep my composure. This was strange. I'd never seen a truck act like this before. The driver kept the light on me for what felt like forever. At least a minute, maybe more. I was starting to panic. Why wasn't he passing me? Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the truck moved to the right lane and passed in front of me. But here's where it gets weirder. As I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, I slowed down, thinking the worst was over. But the truck didn't move on. Instead, it matched my speed again, pulling alongside me, and click, the spotlight came back on, this time shining directly into the passenger side of my car. My heart started pounding in my chest. There was no doubt about it now. This driver wasn't just trying to pass me, he was following me. I kept my eyes glued to the road. I knew better than to make eye contact. But it felt like, if I looked, things would somehow get worse. Then, as if to add to my nightmare, the truck veered into the leftmost lane, pulling ahead of me again, its spotlight going dark. I tried to shake off the fear, but I couldn't. So I decided to move over into the left lane to create some space. The moment I did, the truck followed me again, and the spotlight clicked on once more, blinding me from the side. My heart raced. What was going on? Why was this happening? I had to get away. I switched lanes again, hoping to shake the truck off by speeding up. But it didn't matter. The truck shifted lanes and accelerated to match me again. I was trapped. Now you might be asking, what would you do? Well, I had only one option. I floored it. I slammed my foot on the gas, pushing my small car to speeds I'd never reached before. 90 miles per hour. I managed to create some distance, but the truck wasn't giving up. In the rearview mirror, I saw that massive orange rig charging after me, eating up the distance with a terrifying speed. And then it was there, right beside me again, the spotlight blinding me. The trucker was relentless. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to outsmart him. I hit my brakes hard, dropping back behind the truck, hoping to hide in its blind spot. It worked for a moment. The truck shifted to the right lane, and I followed. But the moment we approached an exit, I knew this was my chance. I stayed behind the truck until the very last second. As the exit approached, I saw my escape route. I waited until the truck's body was beyond the point where the exit split off, and then I darted out. I made my way down the exit ramp, my heart still racing, hands gripping the wheel like my life depended on it. Now here's where things get strange. I pulled into a Wendy's right beside the highway, shaking from the adrenaline. I parked, got out, and checked my car. I expected to see something, scratches, dents, anything that could explain why this truck driver was so fixated on me. But there was nothing. I waited there for what felt like an eternity, watching the road, hoping the truck wouldn't show up. Finally, when I felt it was safe, I got back on the interstate and drove to my hotel. But I still wonder, was that driver trying to warn me? Or was there something more sinister going on? Now let me ask you something. What do you think was happening that night? Was the trucker simply a creep? Or was there a deeper reason he was following her? And what do you think would have happened if she hadn't taken that exit? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think. It's early November. The air is cold, and the rain falls like it's trying to drown the world. My fiancée, Willa, and I have always been drawn to the thrill of spontaneous, late-night drives, especially when the weather turns ugly. We start out on a familiar road in our city and keep going, seeing where the path leads. Sometimes we end up miles away, in strange little towns or lost in woods, so thick you can barely see the sky. It's the perfect mix of excitement and mystery. But tonight felt different. It's midnight. The kind of midnight that's soaked in fog, with the kind of silence that presses on your chest. We've been on a muddy, narrow path for what feels like forever. And something's wrong. No other cars, just the rain and the trees brushing against the car, like they're trying to pull us off the road. Willa's poking around on her phone, trying to figure out where we are. But even Google Maps doesn't seem to know. We're deep in the country now, heading north, with nothing but pitch-black woods around us. Willa's face tightens. We should have passed 200 Street West by now. We're lost, aren't we? I try to laugh it off, but even I can't ignore the unease crawling up my spine. Should we turn around? I ask, my voice barely breaking the silence. She shakes her head. Number, there's no turning around. We'll get stuck. Suddenly the car lurches as I make a sharp turn down a narrow, overgrown road that barely looks wide enough for a car. Wait, are we really doing this? I glance at her, half nervous, half excited. The headlights flicker and illuminate an abandoned house up ahead. This place doesn't look good, Willa whispers, her voice tight with fear. We're trapped now. The road's too narrow to back out, and when we make it to the clearing, we can't help but stare at the dilapidated house. Windows shattered, the roof in pieces, the yard a junkyard of broken cars, scrap metal, and trash. A few cats slink around the yard, their eyes glowing eerily in the headlights. Then, something moves. A rock the size of a walnut slams against our windshield, the sound sharp enough to shatter the glass. I almost choke. Willa screams, grabbing my arm. Denny, what was that? I'm frozen, my heart hammering in my chest. And then from the shadows of the trees, a man stumbles out, holding a shovel. He's wearing a dirty navy coat and a long unkempt beard. But it's not just him. A woman crawls out onto the porch, her movements jerky, like a spider. She's tall, too thin, her gray hair wild and tangled, her hands dark, unnaturally dark, like they've been dipped in something wrong. I don't know how we didn't drive off that night, but when the door to the house opens, do you think we were followed the moment we left? Or did they somehow know exactly where we were going? Tell me what you think in the comments below. I need to know. Willa is sobbing now, slapping at the car door lock, her eyes wide with terror. I hit the gas and reverse over cinder blocks and branches, my pulse roaring in my ears. I don't look back, not until we're miles away, on a long straight road. That's when I see it. The headlights. They're behind us, just behind us. The same truck, that same nasty, rusty Chevy. We make a few turns, they follow. Another turn, they follow. We don't speak. We don't even look at each other. All I can think about is the woman on that porch, her dark hands, her unblinking eyes. I'm gripping the wheel so tight, my knuckles hurt. When we finally pull into a gas station, I check the rearview mirror. The truck passes, slow, like they're studying us. We wait. We take a deep breath, go inside, get some food. But the question lingers. What the hell just happened? What were they doing? And why did they follow us? Were they planning to trap us? Or worse? Let me know your theories in the comments. Trust me, I still haven't figured it out.